Hello, and welcome back to How Would I End It with Tyler Paterson. Today we'll be talking about a movie that I was late to the game on. I thought it was a comic book movie from a lesser known brand of comics that were not Marvel or DC, something from Image or Dark Horse or something. Turns out it wasn't. It was actually just a really well written movie. John Wick. I wasn't ready for how good John Wick 1 was. It was awesome. John Wick 2 was out shortly thereafter, and I remember seeing that, and I remember thinking it was very good, but it wasn't on par with John Wick 1 because few sequels ever are. So for John Wick 3, if it were up to me, if this was the way I would end the movie, I tried to capture what I loved about John Wick 1, and that was the bad guys deserved it. We didn't need to know much about them. We just know that they deserved what they got. 2 was that there had to be insane action sequences that were also believable. And 3, there had to be an element of like cool art and visuals in it. That's inherent in both movies, and there's a lot of the mythology inside that world has to come to life somehow. So both movies open with kind of teasers as to what's going to happen. First movie opens up with him slamming into a garage and crawling out and looking at his cell phone. The second movie starts with a car chase. I think it would be fun to start the third movie in total darkness, and you hear what sounds like gunfire and people screaming. Then everything comes into frame, and it's just fireworks going off over celebration in the Mexican Riviera. I think that would be a ton of fun, and it shows that John has secluded himself inside of South America or Central America, around that area somewhere. We find that he's now going by the name Miguel Santo, and he is running a beachside cafe called Libre, which is Spanish for fight. And the first real scene we get is Aurelio is down there with him, his good old friend there. And Aurelio is going by a different name too. And John mentions, "You're the only person who knows where I am." And Aurelio's like, "That's the way it stays. You don't have to worry about me." Because they go way back. And then he says, "I really like what you're doing here, Miguel. You're doing good things for people and you're putting money back into the community. I like that. Helen would be proud." Someone tries to steal from him, some little kid. Not little kid, probably someone in their teens, and they get stopped. A familiar actor brings the kid in to face John, and that is Antonio Banderas. I think it would be a lot of fun if he made an appearance in this movie too. We have Keanu Reeves and Antonio Banderas who were both really at their height in the late 90s, early 2000s, so it's kind of fun to see them play off each other again. I would make sure that Antonio Banderas, who we'll refer to as Antonio as his character name to make things easy, is seen as kind of a badass, has very similar reactions to the people around him that John Wick has. People kind of know who he is, they don't want to mess with him, and they're very, very respectful of him. But John Wick doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't really know who John Wick is, or so we think. So he brings the kid up and is like, "This kid was stealing from you." The kid is like, I'm sorry, gives the money back. And John, being the smart person he is like, "Don't do it again. Why do you need the money? Do you need a job? I can give you a job." And Antonio Banderas is kind of like, "What? This isn't the way we handle things down here." He lets the kid go. The kid kind of scampers off. And Antonio's like, "By the way, this is going to keep happening to you unless you decide you want to pay for us to keep you safe." The little implication that he's part of the cartel. John is like, "I don't need the protection." Antonio says, "Yes, you do." John says, "No, I don't." And there's a little bit of a standoff moment, and they're like, "What's going on here?" Antonio leaves, and is seen later colluding with the kid. The whole thing was a setup to try and scare John into buying into the services of the cartel. It doesn't happen. Aurelio says he's got to get going, wishes John, aka Miguel, the best of luck, and leaves. And that's when we see him get kidnapped. We know in the first movie that John Wick snapped after people stole his car and killed his dog. I don't know if this movie can top that. The second one definitely didn't. The second one was, he was being called back into a world through like you can't say no to the favor that they were asking. One of the cats is hanging out back there. Likes it when I tell stories. So the question really is, how do we bring John back into this world? He's been excommunicado. He has assassins hunting for him. Any breach of that would be a death sentence. So how do we bring him back in, and how do we create the villain? I think the way we do that is by having Antonio kidnap Aurelio, which is his best friend, kind of his last tie to the world and his last tie to sanity. What really does it is what's about to happen. So John goes after them to find Aurelio. He tracks them down through one of the first cool visuals of the movie, through a lucha libre match. So it's people in masks, the characters, they're high flying, they're doing flips, so the crowd's going crazy. And I think he has to track them through that type of venue. And when he does, it's hard to recognize who's a real good guy, who's a bad guy, who's playing a bad guy inside the ring, who's playing a good guy inside the ring. Are they switched? Are they reversed? And I think there's going to be a lot of like cool hand-to-hand combat stuff that happens there while he's trying to break through to get to the back, to get to the cartels, to save Aurelio. While that's going on, we see that Antonio is doing some research, and you see this real slick smile spread across his face, and he goes, well, 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 I found John Wick. And there's going to be a John Wick fight behind me. The camera switches to Antonio, who gets on the phone and issues some orders. She goes, this is where to be, and this is who to kill. While John is going through the lucha libre matches, to get Aurelio back, Antonio is seen putting in a phone call saying, I need a hit done, here's the address, here's who to take out. And we see these cartel enforcers and hitmen saying, okay, we'll go do it. And it seems like he's talking about killing John Wick. What actually happens is that John kicks down the door and saves Aurelio, kind of no problem, which is a little unnerving for John and Aurelio. They're both experienced enough in this underworld to recognize when something doesn't feel right, and this definitely doesn't feel right. It cuts to the Continental. Winston is behind the check-in area with the other guy who's always there. I'm blanking on his name right now. We see two of the cartel hitmen walk into the Continental, pull out guns, and execute both of them on the spot. This is the driving factor that brings John back into this world for one final big blowout. It's the cartel versus the underground assassins. That whole web of assassins is now up against one of the craziest, most violent syndicates in the world. That, to me, has the weight of a John Wick movie. And who's at the front of it all? John Wick, and on the other end, Antonio Banderas. We have two badass hitmen leading a group of ruthless killers against each other. That is the premise for John Wick 3. Throughout the course of the film, too, we learned that Antonio Banderas' character used to be an assassin. Right on the cusp of when John Wick started, he got excommunicated, he got excommunicado, and fled to Mexico, where he became the cartel's biggest hitman. So the balance is there. John Wick is excommunicado, Antonio Banderas is excommunicado, and they're both butting heads. If you're a fan of the John Wick series, you know that most of this movie is told through fight scenes. I can't go through beat by beat through all those fight scenes, that would be insane, but there's a lot of themes I want to keep up with. The hand-to-hand stuff is amazing. The choreographers of the series are incredible. We got to keep that. We got to keep a lot of the cool gunplay, a lot of the cool jiu-jitsu and judo movements and all that stuff. It's got to stay in. I think lucha libre should come back. That style of wrestling / fighting. And I want the big finale scene to take place during Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, just to create that really cool visual of life and death and how everything is kind of cyclical and moves in circles. That would be the big capstone to the piece. The other little detail that I think would be amazing is that in the first movie, and even in the second movie they call it out, that John Wick is so badass that one time in a bar, he killed a man with a pencil. With just that pencil. In this movie, to top that, the third one has got to be bigger and crazier than all the other ones. John Wick needs to kill someone with a taco. Sounds silly. In my opinion, it fits within this realm. It fits within this world. I don't want it to be hammy either. I want this to be a legit way. I don't quite know how this would work, but a way to kill someone with a taco. I don't know if he like loads it with an explosive or puts like razors in the meat or anything like that. I don't really buy the idea of him like biting the taco in half and like slicing someone's face or throat. Like that doesn't really make sense. I'm sure we can come up with something really, really interesting, but from killing someone with a pencil to killing someone with a taco, I think is kind of a fun arc. It would be a really violent climax. He would have to go toe-to-toe with Antonio Banderas' character, but I think like in the other movies, when it comes time for them to really face off, he dispatches this guy with ease, cementing him as the greatest assassin of all time. Once they beat the cartel, they're able to implement other people to kind of take over for these old drug lords and stuff like that. Not to bring peace, because that's not a realistic ending. I think the realistic ending is to just take other lieutenants and put them in place, give them power, and just make the deal, like, you don't mess with us again, like, we'll do this again. And it's enough for the new cartel to be like, yep, no problem, we're not gonna mess with you, we'll stay away. So because John Wick was able to pull this off and get revenge for Winston and reestablish the Continental, he becomes the only person ever to be brought back from excommunicado. So he in turn becomes the new Winston and runs the Continental. These worlds still exist. There was a rumor that the John Wick universe might be made into a TV show. I think this plays directly into it. So the mythology stands, the action sequences stand, and we have villains who we want to see fall, and a motivation for the main character, which is revenge, which was John's MO in the first movie. Not as much the second movie, which kind of diminished it in my opinion, but now we have him back to his true form in the third capstone, busting it out like crazy. That's how I would end John Wick 3.